The review embargo has lifted, which means it's time to talk about X-Men 97. What's going on, everybody, and welcome to my review / impressions of the first 3 episodes of X-Men 97, the latest thing coming from Marvel Studios, or Marvel Animation as they're calling it, but most notably is the return to one of the most popular Marvel-related shows of all time, the X-Men animated series of the 90s. As a kid, I watched that show over and over and over again. I even have VHS tapes still sitting around of certain episodes that I saw back when I was a kid, and I would just throw it into the VHS player. And I mean, I think there are just so many fans just like me who grew up in the 90s and in the early 2000s watching these cartoons on repeat, especially sitting in front of the TV for something like Saturday morning cartoons. And beyond X-Men, there was the Spider-Man show and the Fantastic Four show and the Incredible Hulk, and the comic book TV show animated world of that era was just so much fun, and I have so many fond memories of it. Now, like I mentioned, this is my impressions on the first 3 episodes. This review embargo is lifting depending on when you're seeing this. I'm dropping this review as the first 2 episodes of the 2-episode premiere are dropping on Disney+. They sent me 1 extra episode. I will not be giving spoilers here for that episode, as of course that's something that Disney has asked us critics who are talking about it to not do, but also I don't want you guys to feel spoiled on anything or have anything be revealed for you here that isn't already on Disney+. But I am going to talk about a couple of things that happened in the first and second episode that I think are pretty exciting, and I'll leave that to the very end of this video for a little bit of a spoiler section. But quickly, for anybody who is not familiar with what's going on here, maybe you're newer to the Marvel world or you enjoy X-Men but you don't really know anything about the series from the 90s, there was a series in the 90s that was incredibly popular, and it was really kind of part of what launched the love of the X-Men into the mainstream for so many people ahead of the live action movies that of course would start in the early 2000s. And this was definitely probably my biggest and earliest introduction into the X-Men myself. Them in their classic costumes, that classic theme song that has got to be one of the best theme songs ever written for a TV show or for an animated show of any kind, anything superhero related. It is absolutely iconic, and I would play it here for you guys, but of course I'd get copyright strikes, so I'm going to not do that. But if you've watched the original series, it's amazing. And if you've never seen the original series, go onto YouTube after this video, type in X-Men intro original, and it should pop up, and you'll hear one of the greatest intros of all time for an X-Men show or for a superhero show of all time. And so with all that said, here we are now with X-Men 97, which is a resurgence of that show. Some people may be wondering, is this a reimagining? Is this a reboot, a remake? It is a reboot in the sense that it's its own series. It is called X-Men 97, and it'll start from its first season, but it does play off of the events of the previous X-Men series. So it does speak to you as a viewer as though you've seen that other series. Now, this series does start off in a way that is trying to trickle you into getting into the narrative that's being told here, but I do think it is definitely something that hopes that you've seen the original content, because they do kind of drop a lot of dialogue that focuses on those previous events that took place in the original X-Men series. And just right out of the gate, before we talk about what this season is about so far, I'm just so happy to see it in such beautiful animation. I haven't covered the original X-Men series here on my channel. I planned to initially before this dropped on Disney+. I just never made the time properly to actually do it. But one series that I did cover here on the channel just a few years back was XMen Evolution, that I used to watch on Cartoon Network and various other platforms when I was a kid. Loved that show, and it was always kind of, for me, felt like, no pun intended, the natural evolution of the original X-Men series in a lot of ways, in terms of modernizing it for the time that I was growing up watching it in the early 2000s. And so for me, this show right here feels like a nice blend of X-Men Evolution and the original 90s X-Men series. Of course, it's far more leading into that original 90s X-Men series, as this is the continuation to that, but it felt like a nice blend of the two, modernized with really nice animation that's mostly 2D. It's great to see a new Marvel show that's in 2D. We live in a world where everything is so 3D based, and while I've enjoyed things like Marvel's What If, it's nice to have something like this that feels like a little bit more of a throwback, but it also is like very modernized. So it does utilize a lot of 2D, but it has some 3D elements in there as well to kind of enhance that look, but it's still true to the overall feel and vibe and aesthetic of that original series. And yeah, I just was having such a blast. Even the intro, this isn't a spoiler, but the intro to the show is the classic intro from back in the day, the same song we know and love, with a bit of an updated intro. In a lot of ways, the same intro, just with new animation and a couple of things that are different, including some of the characters that are more prominent in this show than they were in the original series, and a couple of villains that are thrown into that intro that are a little bit different than that original series. But all in all, it just right out of the gate told you with the intro and with the animation style and, you know, hearing that theme throughout certain action sequences, that this was a show that was going to honor that legacy and honor that series from back in the day. And if you are like me and fell in love with a lot of these characters from those cartoons from the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, then I think you're going to have a lot of fun going back and jumping into this world now with these first 2 episodes that you guys will be able to watch immediately. And now weekly after this, it'll be weekly drops of episodes. Like I said, I've seen the 3rd episode, and I'm happy to say, before I get into my thoughts on what this is all about right now, I'm happy to say that the 3rd episode is really exciting. I think it sets up some really cool things for what's to come in the season, and they're definitely not holding back. They're not wasting any time. The pacing has been pretty quick in getting us to the nitty-gritty, and I think that episode 4 and beyond are definitely going to be incredibly exciting, and I look forward to everybody seeing the 3rd episode once it officially airs on Disney+. But with all that said, let's touch on what this season is about right out of the gate, because the season opens up and we're told immediately that Professor Xavier has been killed. And so now the X-Men are in a really tough situation. You have Scott, Cyclops, that this season has mainly focused on the most on so far. And he's really struggling with taking on the leadership role now that everybody is kind of struggling with the loss of Professor Xavier, but also not wanting to necessarily take, calls or take rules or take, leadership from Scott. He's kind of dealing with putting himself into this leadership role to rule the whole X-Men. It's one thing to go on a mission and be the leader of the mission, but to be the leader of the X-Men as a whole is something that he's struggling with. On top of that, we immediately learn that Jean Grey is pregnant. So not only does he have to learn what it is to be a leader of the X-Men, he's also having the issue now that his wife, one of the most powerful X-Men, is also pregnant with their child. And so they're also considering the idea of leaving the X-Men as a whole and going on and starting their own life. And with all these events going on at one time, you also have Magneto in the mix, who now with the passing of Charles Xavier is in a situation where they're kind of forced to work together, the X-Men and their longtime foe Magneto, who of course based on the original X-Men series has had tons and tons of dangerous throwdowns with the X-Men and has often been the biggest threat to the entire world and to the X-Men themselves. And so now they're struggling with the prospect of having to work alongside their greatest foe, alongside with everything else that I've already mentioned. And that's all I'm going to say in terms of the events of the show. I will jump into a little spoiler section right after this just to touch on episode 1 and 2, some key moments that I think were really interesting and excited me moving forward. But yeah, what I can say just genuinely as far as my overall impressions for anybody who's just watching this to know, hey, is it good or not? I had a blast with it. I think if you were a fan of the original X-Men series, there's tons and tons of great moments that just really honor the legacy of the original franchise. I think, like anything, when things are modernized, there are little things that are different. The animation, it took a little bit of getting used to, but that original animation by today's standards is fairly dated. It's charming for its time, and I don't think that this show ever does anything visually or stylistically that dramatically changes it from that original one that feels like it's kind of dishonoring it. For me, it felt like just a natural continuation that really honored that original franchise or that original series. And it's also great to have a lot of the returning voice cast for this. There are some people who don't return, unfortunately. You have people returning like Lenore Zan, like Cal Dodd, like George Buza, like Catherine Disher, and Chris Potter. And then there's some new faces in the mix here as well, played by Ray Chaser, C.P. Carliak, Holly Chow, Isaac Robinson Smith, and more. So it's a nice blend of some new voice actors in the mix, as well as some of those original voice casts coming back to play these iconic roles. And just on that level alone, you can tell there was a lot of love put into this behind the camera, in front of the camera, with the animators, behind the mic, in front of the mic, whatever the case may be. I just genuinely felt as a lifelong X-Men fan, as a lifelong Marvel fan, as a lifelong fan of that X-Men animated series, I felt like a kid watching this, and I think there's nothing better than watching something come back that you're nostalgic for and just having it take you back to what you felt like when you were watching it back in the day. And on that level, I'm incredibly excited to see where the rest of the season goes, and I believe season 2 has already kind of been greenlit. I don't know, but I'm really excited for the rest of the season and what I haven't seen. And so with that said, I'm going to jump into the little quick spoiler section here. It won't be very long, but that's your warning. So yeah, I mentioned that Magneto has to work with the X-Men, but at the very tail end of that first episode, learning that Charles Xavier's will literally said that he was giving everything that he owned and the leadership essentially of the X-Men to Magneto was pretty awesome and shocking at the same time. And I think it created a really interesting dynamic jumping into episode 2. Obviously, a lot of episode 1 is setting up where all our characters are, and we already touched on that and kind of what they're dealing with. But jumping into episode 2, I was really excited because I was like, okay, cool, I can understand now why this is a 2-episode premiere. And in episode 2, you know, you have so many key moments. You know, I love that Magneto is kind of trying to show the world. I don't know if Magneto is going to end up kind of pulling the rug from under everybody and kind of, you know, end up being just a traditional bad Magneto later on, but I love the way he goes about showing that he's here to, you know, live up to what Charles wanted. He's trying to achieve Charles's dream because now Charles is dead, and that fight that he had to be evil and to fight against humanity isn't all there. And so the way that he protects the senators, or not the senators, but I guess they're senators, yeah. The people who are, you know, they're putting him on trial. Yeah, you know, the way that he handled all of that, I thought was great. The way he kind of like still intimidates them and brings fear into them, but showcases them like where he's coming from, I thought was awesome. That whole fight of them trying to get at Magneto was awesome. And the fact that Storm ended up losing her powers in the second episode was something I didn't expect. But again, just thought that was really impactful, and it worked. And it was part of what fueled Magneto's whole speech to the people who had him on trial there in the sky when he takes them up. Yeah, the second episode ends with Morph getting a knock on the door, thinking that it's Storm coming back because Storm chose to leave. And we have a Jean clone. Now, anybody who's a fan of the comic books of X-Men is not surprised to see this, and you can pretty clearly see where this is going narratively. But yeah, overall, I just thought that was a really great way to end that episode. Now, I did see episode 3, and I can't touch on what happens there and all the events, but I will say, if I wanted to allude to something to give you guys a little bit of a teaser, and this is my slight spoiler warning, if you don't want anything alluded to, then don't keep watching. But if you do want to know just a little bit of me alluding to what's to come in episode 3, let's just say it gets a little sinister. If you're a fan of Marvel, I don't think I have to say much more. Overall, I really enjoyed this show. I found it to be a lot of fun, just the first 3 episodes, and I look forward to doing a full-scale review when the entire season is over. We'll talk on spoilers, we'll do all that fun jazz, but these are just my impressions and me rambling in front of a camera and in front of a mic about the X-Men being back. X-Men 97 is here, and I'm just happy as a child, as a product of the 90s, as somebody who grew up loving these characters and getting to know who they were through that original series. It's just a real pleasure to have a continuation come back all these years later with the same voice cast, with the same music, with a lot of the same creators. It's really a dream come true, and I'm really excited to continue watching alongside you guys week to week as we get to the finale, and then we'll talk again once we get there and see if my opinion has changed. But overall, really enjoyed it. And if you got this far into the video, I would say my only real issue, honestly, the pacing's a little bit fast, and it feels like it doesn't let like everything breathe all the time. There's some things that feels like they're trying to get the story going, but it feels in that way very faithful to the way that these stories were told in animation back in the 90s. Sometimes it was just like, hey, let's keep moving, let's keep going. They had downtime, but the episodes definitely were eventful, and I feel like this definitely follows suit. So very minor gripe really in the grand scheme of it. Overall, I enjoyed it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you for watching. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe for more videos. Are you excited for X-Men to be back? Answering any and all of that, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.